In the gilded halls of 19th century Europe, one name was whispered with a mix of awe and reverence: Elisabeth of Bavaria. History would come to know her as Empress Sisi of Austria, a woman whose beauty was so legendary, it was said to defy nature itself. Kings and emperors sought her favor. Artists and poets were desperate to capture her essence, and the public saw her as a living fairy tale. But what history often omits, what the portraits and poems fail to show, is the silent nightmare her life became. This isn't just the story of Europe's most beautiful woman. It's the story of a prison built from ivory skin and chestnut hair, and how the relentless pursuit of perfection can become a curse. Because for Empress Sisi, beauty didn't bring freedom. It brought destruction. When the young Elizabeth married Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, the entire continent was captivated. She wasn't merely beautiful. She was an ethereal vision. Her features seemed sculpted by an artist. Her figure was impossibly slender, and her presence could quiet even the most boisterous of royal courts. But as she stepped into her role as empress, a chilling realization dawned upon her. The world didn't love Elizabeth. It loved the flawless image she presented. Her mind, her spirit, her soul, they were all secondary to the perfection of her face. And so, in the cold, opulent rooms of the Hofburg Palace, she made a silent, desperate vow. She would never allow herself to age. She would preserve this impossible beauty, no matter the cost. Every single morning, long before the sun rose over Vienna, Elizabeth would lock herself away in her private chambers. No advisors, no family, and certainly no interruptions were permitted. For 3 hours, she would engage in a ritual that was part vanity, part obsession. Her hair, a magnificent cascade of chestnut waves that fell nearly to the floor, was her crown and her torment. A personal hairdresser, a woman who lived in constant fear, would begin the painstaking process of brushing, braiding, and dressing it. But this was no gentle grooming session. Elizabeth was obsessive. If a single strand of hair was found on the brush or on the floor, the servants would freeze, their hearts pounding. The Empress's displeasure wasn't expressed through shouting or dramatic outbursts. It came as a cold, silent punishment. Servants were dismissed for what she deemed carelessness, their careers ruined over a few fallen hairs. Others were simply reduced to a state of terrified silence, afraid to breathe too loudly in her presence. Beauty, in this palace, demanded absolute, unquestioning obedience. Her hair became the focal point of her life's anxieties. The hairdresser, Franziska Pfeifferlicki, was one of the most powerful and most terrified people in the entire empire. Elizabeth would inspect every brush, every comb, every pin. She would even have the fallen hairs collected on a silver tray and counted. If the number was deemed too many, Franziska would often feign a fainting spell or burst into tears, knowing that the Empress's cold wrath was imminent. To protect herself, the hairdresser developed a secret technique. She would hide the fallen strands of hair in the pockets of her apron, praying the Empress would never discover her deception. This was no longer about looking beautiful. This was about managing the paralyzing fear of a woman who saw every lost hair as a personal defeat against time. And the obsession didn't stop there. Her waist, cinched into corsets day after day, measured a shocking 50 centimeters less than 20 inches. Court physicians issued grave warnings about the damage she was doing to her internal organs. Courtiers whispered behind their fans about her skeletal figure. Her own body screamed for nourishment. She ignored them all. Elizabeth saw food as the ultimate enemy, a direct threat to her impossibly slim figure. She starved herself relentlessly, embarking on extreme diets that would last for weeks on end. Her meals consisted of little more than thin broths, the juice of raw beef, a few egg whites, or milk. The concept of weight became a source of constant terror. Every pound, every ounce, was a mark of failure in her quest for eternal youth. As the years went by, Elizabeth's behavior grew more reclusive. She began to withdraw from the rigid formalities of court life entirely. The ceremonies, the grand balls, the public appearances, she hated them all. Ironically, the most beautiful woman in Europe grew to despise being seen. She developed a phobia of mirrors, turning them to the wall or covering them with cloth. She would often hide her face behind a fan or a parasol when in public, desperate to prevent people from scrutinizing her for any sign of aging. To escape the prying eyes of the court, she traveled constantly and restlessly, journeying across Europe on her imperial yacht, never staying in one place long enough to form connections or feel settled. After her 30th birthday, she refused to be photographed. She refused to sit for any more portraits. In her mind, the passage of time was not a natural process. It was a personal insult, an enemy to be fought at all costs. She threw herself into a punishing regimen of physical activity, creating her own cult of eternal youth. Her private apartments were fitted with gymnastics, equipment rings, bars, and mats where she would exercise 4 hours each day. She was a master horsewoman, riding until she and her horses were utterly exhausted. She would embark on grueling, fast-paced walks that lasted for hours, often until her ladies-in-waiting collapsed in exhaustion and her own feet bled. For Sisi, pain was a form of control. Pain was a confirmation that she was still fighting, still winning the battle against nature. Pain meant she was still young, and in her world, youth was the only true measure of her worth. While an entire continent continued to admire the idealized image of their fairy tale empress, Elisabeth herself lived in a state of profound and desolate isolation. She grew distant from her children, unable to provide the maternal warmth they craved. Her relationship with her husband, the emperor, became a landscape of misunderstanding and emotional distance. She was trapped, not by palace walls, but by her own legend. The beauty that had defined her had also stolen her peace, her joy, and her very identity. In a moment of rare, heartbreaking honesty, she wrote in her private journal, "I am a slave to my hair and my face. I am not free even in my own body." The tragic end to her story came in 1898 in Geneva. While walking along the shore of the lake, Elisabeth was attacked and stabbed by an Italian anarchist, but the assassin hadn't targeted her for political reasons, or for power, or for revenge against the empire. He had killed her simply because she was famous, because her name was known throughout the world. As she lay dying, witnesses reported that she didn't scream or cry out. She remained composed, almost serene. It was as if silence, the companion she had cultivated for decades in her lonely palace rooms, was there to greet her at the very end. The final, unsettling truth of Empress Sisi's life is that she wasn't destroyed by an assassin's blade. She was destroyed long before that, slowly and methodically, by the crushing weight of expectation. She was a victim of a world that taught her a series of brutal lessons. That a woman's value lies only in her beauty, that aging is a failure, and that perfection is the only path to survival. She became history's most beautiful empress, a timeless icon of grace and elegance. But behind the legend, she was one of its most tragic and loneliest prisoners, a haunting reminder of the devastating price of perfection.